I'm Beverly Wiemer, member of the Garden Club of Houston, which is a member of the Garden Club of America. Each October we sponsor the Bulb and Plant Mart and provide many different bulbs and native plants for sale to the public, and each person coming to the mart gets a book with a lot of information. This is also published on our website. I have been working with Amaryllis for years. In fact, as a little child, we had Amaryllis in our garden in Natchez, Mississippi, which is in Zone 8. Typically, the zones for Amaryllis surviving outside are 9 to 11. They are tropical bulbs, but they do really well in Houston naturalizing. However, we suggest when you buy a bulb from our plant mart, these have just arrived from Holland. They're very large bulbs, and they've been out of the ground for several weeks, or maybe months. They will bloom in 6 to 8 weeks after they're planted. So if you're buying the bulb in October, and you want the bulb to bloom in November, you would plant it as soon, for Thanksgiving for instance, you would plant it as soon as you bought it. If you want it for Christmas, maybe you would hold it for a few weeks. But you can sort of time it between just count back, 6 to 8 weeks. And the steps that we recommend that you put them in pots, because at that time of year, outside, the weather may be bad, and you would lose a pretty bloom just at the crucial time. So if you put it in a pot, you know that you can control the conditions around it, and you'll have pretty blooms. And then later in the spring, after the weather is warm, you can put it out in the garden for blooms in future years. The directions for doing all of this are found in this Plant Mart book, and I will give you a brief summary of the technique. The pot that we recommend is a clay pot. You can put them in plastic, but clay allows the bulbs, the soil to dry out, which is really important for an amaryllis. Soggy soil will ruin an amaryllis. It'll cause the bulb to rot. Choose a pot that is going to have about 1 inch to 1.5 inches around the outside of the bulb after you put the bulb in it. To improve drainage, I recommend getting one of the round coffee filters for coffee pots because it's easy, and you put it in the bottom of the pot, and then first of all, I'll back up. Soak the pot for about 6 hours in water to get it totally wet, because then it won't absorb all the water that when you first, after you plant the bulb. I also soak these little shards of broken pots to use on top of the coffee filter in the bottom of the pot to improve the drainage. Then you take soil, a very loose potting soil. I prefer a brand called Sunshine, and there are different numbers of Sunshine. I happen to have number 1, but basically it's peat and vermiculite, and it's just a good soil that will drain well. And you put the soil on top of this pile of shards, and I'm not going to fill it all the way to the top, but it ends up being about like this. This is a bulb that I planted several weeks ago. You can tell it's beginning to bloom, and I have a stake in it. If the stems are very long, you will want to stake to keep them from falling over. This one, of course, doesn't need the stake now. The soil level should be about 1 inch below the top of the pot so that when you water your bulb, the soil doesn't flow over the top of your pot. It's just practical. After you have planted this new bulb, you water it very well. You tamp the soil down around the bulb to make sure that the air bubbles are, that there are no air bubbles. And then put the bulb aside in a cool place. If you want it to bloom on the 6 to 8 week schedule, it will need some light. It can have sunlight or just a real strong light if you're keeping it inside, or in Houston probably outside is just fine. These bulbs will have 2, probably 3, and sometimes 4 stalks of blooms. Typically, bulbs will have 4 blooms on a stalk. Ours frequently have 6, and I've had this year one variety that had 8 at one time, and had a second stalk with 8 at one time. It was one of our newer bulbs, newer varieties. Amaryllis can be grown in water. I personally do not grow mine in water because it seems to sap the nutrients for future blooms the next year. They just don't seem to be as healthy a bulb the next year, but you can certainly put them in water. The main thing is to just have the water level come no higher than the roots. This is a perfect shape vase for doing this because you can see the water level, you can see the roots. If the bulb, any part of the bulb is sitting in water, it will rot, so you absolutely do not want that. If there are any little dried pieces on the bulb, you want to pull that away, and I can tell that this little bulb is beginning to peek through. So it is ready to start blooming. If you want to hold your bulbs for several weeks after you purchase them at Bulb Mart, the thing to do is keep them in their bag and put them in a cool, dark, dry closet. That is very important. Cool, dark, dry. Then you check every week because that little bulb might be peeking through at the top, and when they start growing, they're going to grow in the bag, in the dark, and they'll be deformed and white and not a pretty sight. So just keep tabs on them, and if you, I've been able to hold them as late as February after a Mart and have pretty blooms in the spring. Some varieties will hold better than others. I have a suggestion for those who work with Amaryllis and any other lily which has yellow pollen. This can be a very big problem. If the pollen gets on any fabric, whether it's your clothes or upholstery, do not touch it with your hands. Your hands have oil in them and your skin, and it will cause a brown spot that cannot be removed by the finest of professional cleaners. The thing to do is, I like to vacuum it off if I have a vacuum handy. If not, take a dry brush, must be dry, and brush all the pollen off. If there's still some little yellow on the fabric, if you will put that fabric in the sunshine, in the direct sunshine, that yellow will magically disappear. I do not know the science behind it, it just happens. But it's very important not to touch it with anything that would be oily or wet. Now I will show you some of the bulbs that I bought this year at the Mart and have been growing. And I hope you'll enjoy it, and we'll look forward to seeing you next October.
Hey, turn out there. I think that's already got a line on it. No, well, the gas